Living on the road, waterways or off-grid in the UK. Dickie Dread. This is part 3 of the video series and we're going to get started on chapter 1. So, chapter 1 explores the hidden landscape of alternative living in the UK. From Romani gypsies and Irish travellers to New Age travellers, van lifers, boat dwellers and people trying to live off-grid on their own land. It argues that although these groups may appear very different on the surface, they often face the same deeper realities: finding somewhere to stay, dealing with authorities, navigating planning law, handling waste, water and power, and surviving within the legal grey areas. Chapter also challenges romantic ideas about freedom and mobility, explains that alternative living in the UK is rarely as simple as buying land and doing what you want, or living freely in a van. Instead, visibility, planning law, definitions of dwellings, traveller status and local enforcement all shape what people can realistically do. Alongside practical legal discussion, chapter places these lifestyles within a longer historical tradition of travelling cultures in Britain. It argues that many travelling and off-grid communities have historically been misunderstood, stereotyped or treated with hostility by mainstream society and the media. Ultimately, Chapter 1 sets up the core theme of the book, that the real conflict is not simply about caravans, boats or vans, but about who is allowed to live outside the standard housing model and how the system reacts when people try. So, Chapter 1, Types of Travellers and Off-Grid Folk. So we're told that if you buy some land, a van or a boat, you can just quietly live your life. But that belief starts falling apart very quickly once you actually try it. Because the reality is that most people living differently are navigating a maze of rumours, half-truths, planning rules, police powers and legal grey areas that even experienced travellers often misunderstand. And once you start digging into the law properly, it becomes clear that just how complicated the system really is. So here's the real question: how much of what people think they know about alternative living is actually incorrect? And we're going to find out. So, Chapter 1. So, the types of travellers and off-grid folk. The UK has always had travelling people, but today the landscape includes everyone from traditional travelling communities to van lifers, vehicle dwellers, boat dwellers, off-grid homesteaders, small-scale landowners and modern nomads who have chosen some form of life outside conventional housing. Although the original edition of this book focused primarily on what are commonly called New Age travellers, it's important to recognise that they are only one part of a much wider landscape of alternative living in the UK. The UK has long been home to many different forms of mobile and semi-settled life, and that landscape continues to evolve. Alongside the convoy culture that emerged in the late 20th century, there are now increasing numbers of people living in vans, buses, trucks, caravans and other mobile homes, as well as those living on boats and those purchasing land to establish off-grid dwellings. These groups are often connected through modern technology, but they face many of the same practical and legal realities that travellers have dealt with for hundreds of years. Boundaries between those groups are rarely clear-cut. In reality, the edges look more like a blurred Venn diagram than a set of neat categories. Someone living on a small off-grid plot may share more day-to-day experience with a roadside traveller or a continuous cruiser than with someone in a conventional house. Equally, a van lifer may transition to land-based or water-based living or move between them over time. The challenge is finding places to stay or more, dealing with authorities, managing water, power and waste, and navigating the legal grey areas around vehicles, waterways, land use and planning are often remarkably similar. For that reason, this chapter begins with a brief overview of the different travelling and off-grid communities that exist in the UK today. These include long-established ethnic travelling cultures such as Romani gypsies, Irish travellers, as well as show people, seasonal road workers and other historic mobile communities. These sections are the most detailed, but I feel it is important to understand that there is a significant history of travelling in the UK and it should not be pushed aside in any book about nomadic life. It also includes the more recent non-ethnic traveller movements that grew out of the free festival scene in the 1970s and 80s, and newer wave of van lifers and vehicle dwellers, those living on boats, navigating the waterways, and those attempt to live on their own land without conventional planning frameworks. In my view, too much emphasis is often placed on the differences between these groups. Whatever our backgrounds, many of us share similar motivations: autonomy, mobility, or self-sufficiency, and some degree of independence from the rigid systems of property, housing, and employment that dominate settled society. Historically, we've also shared something else: a tendency to be misunderstood, misrepresented, or treated with hostility by parts of mainstream society and the media. As the protagonist in The Elephant Man famously said, "I'm not an animal, I'm a human being." The same sentiment applies here. Anyone living a nomadic, semi-nomadic or off-grid lifestyle, whether on the road or on the water or on land, unless the context clearly refers to specific groups. The new label New Age Traveller was largely created by journalists and officials rather than by the people involved. Nevertheless, the term has become widely recognised, so it remains a convenient reference point, even if it is not universally loved. It's also important to note that the legal discussion in this book applies specifically to the UK. During the 1990s and early 2000s, many travellers moved to mainland Europe, partly to escape increasingly restrictive laws in the UK, partly because conditions for mobile living were often easier elsewhere. The legal frameworks governing life on the road, on waterways and off-grid land vary widely across Europe, and exploring them properly would require a separate book. So the second part of this chapter will address the question of traveller status. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of travelling life in the UK. Around campfires, on sites, on towpaths, in the pubs, or among those by land, you'll often hear confident claims about what the law allows or forbids, and many of these claims turn out to be incomplete or simply wrong. In this section, in the sections that follow, I will outline how traveller status is defined in legal terms, how it has been interpreted in practice, and what it actually means for people living on the road, on water, or on land. Understanding that legal framework is essential. Whether someone identifies as a traveller, van life, a vehicle dweller, boat dweller, off-grid landowner, or something else entirely, the laws governing vehicles, waterways, land use, planning and mobility ultimately shape what is possible for anyone attempting to live outside the conventional housing system. So what this section really shows is that travelling and off-grid life are far more diverse than most people realise. And if that's true, then many of the assumptions people make about travellers, van lifers, boat dwellers and off-grid... Fuck off! Sorry. Turn this bloody thing off. Boat dwellers and off-grid communities begin to fall apart, which means the issue may not just be where people live, it might actually be why modern society becomes uncomfortable when people step outside the standard housing model altogether. And if that's the case, who really gets to decide what a normal way of living looks like? Anyway, next up, still on Chapter 1, Types of Travellers and Off-Grid Folk, and we will be covering gypsies.